All right, Scar 16S. It's a pretty divisive rifle. A lot of people love it, a lot of people hate it. Navy SEALs are kind of scared of these things, particularly the 17. I wanted to give my thoughts on the system as someone who shot it a lot. I'm a mechanical engineer that's got about 42K on this, and I've had it for about 9 years. It took me a little bit of time to get there. I'm going to go over a lot of the aftermarket and things that people should consider if they're getting one of these. Unfortunately, with how it is, you do have to spend a good bit of money out of the box to really get this thing to where it should be, and I think that's unfortunate. There's a lot of things that this comes with. It really, it just, or it doesn't come with it. It really just should, but unfortunately, that is how it is. It's a good bit pricier than an AR-15. A lot of people are turned off by that, and I think some of it's valid. I think some of it's poor cope. It is quite expensive, but if you do shoot enough rounds, it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things because the round count was worth the cost of your rifle, and in my case, it didn't matter to me. I'd rather have a couple of really nice rifles than like 15 standard, um, same setup 16-inch AR-15s, which is what a lot of people do, which is just weird to me. Um, as far as like a 10-ish inch SBR, this thing is so much like it's so much better on parts life than a Mark 18 clone is. It's kind of laughable. This thing has broken no parts. The barrel I swapped for obvious reasons because I shot out the other one. I put a fresh bolt in just to wear evenly. My cam pin's pretty chewed up, but it hasn't broken. I have some gouging on the lower left receiver rail, and I think it's like 100 or so rounds in. I noticed that. It's never gotten any worse. And I had a hairline crack in the receiver where when I was disassembling it, I forgot to remove the charging handle and had it standing this way, and it dropped right into it. Also not gotten worse, and that was like 6 years ago or so. So even though it's got some wear, it really hasn't had any issues. And I don't think I've ever seen a Mark 18 do that. The In case you don't believe me, and that's entirely fine. I'm just some guy on the internet. You can look at Battlefield Vegas, and they have machine gun versions of these that people rent, and they've got like 200K on a 16S or maybe more now. And I think the only thing they had break was their cam pin rail, and it's got two screws that hold it in. It's a quick fix, so kind of legendary for parts life, and they're very soft recoiling. They are a bit bouncier than AR-15s due to the bolt mass of these, but that's the huge advantage. They're also just very reliable, and they run very clean because they're a short stroke piston. I've had barely any malfunctions, most of which were probably ammo related. Um, and this thing just runs super clean, especially suppressed. Way less gas to your face, just due to it not being DI. And it also, you get better sound as far as from your perspective as the shooter because there's no port pop coming out your ejection port. But we'll go tip to butt your ram thumb style. Obviously, I'm running this thing suppressed. This is the Otter Creek Labs Polonium K. I had a CGS Helios QD on it for a while. I like this better just because it's shorter and lighter. It's got a little bit more back pressure, but sounds fairly similar. Um, it's just a more overall, I think, practical silencer for this setup. 5.56 is never that quiet anyway, suppressed. Mounted with a rear end mount and a LPM muzzle device, and your choice really doesn't matter, but I would highly recommend either of those companies for your mounting solutions. They're relatively short, lightweight, and simple, and it locks up really well. Also, alignment's been solid with them. I've never had any of them be out of alignment, and I have like a dozen different muzzle devices from them. So barrel's a 10.5 as opposed to the factory 10-inch. I just did that for more wrench clearance. The 10-inch is fine, but I opted for more clearance as well as this being a slightly heavier profile. Had to buy an 18-inch barrel to chop it to do that because they make it a heavier profile. The real important thing to talk about is the gas system on this thing. So it's a short stroke piston system. You have a set screw with a hole in it that's threaded into your gas port. That's how you limit your inlet flow. I think it's very ingenious. It's much better than having a fixed port in an AR-15 and then having guessed wrong for whatever you're running. You have to make a bunch of band-aid solutions with a lot of your other components like your buffer, finding some restrictive gas tube, and so on. You can still do it, but I just think this is a lot smarter system, and I don't know why someone else hasn't thought of that in a lot of the other firearms. It's very simple. It's like a regular set screw. PMM just buys off-the-shelf hardware set screws as an aftermarket solution, and they fit fine. But you can get the OEM ones, which are cut slightly different. It really makes no difference, though. they're a bit over gas from the factory, so it's recommended you step down. You likely want to apply anti-seize when you first get it, or at least before you get a ton of rounds on it, because it will carve it up and get harder to remove. And if you strip it, it's going to be a pain to get out and kind of scary to left-hand drill bit. I'm running a 1.8 millimeter, and the recommended factory is 2.0 for this barrel length. You probably won't need a 2.0 unless you're shooting some really wimpy ammo and you're in adverse conditions or high altitude or so on. On top of that, you can also put an aftermarket gas regulator on it to really help with the overall performance of the rifle. There's a few options. The only two that people should really consider are the Mototech carburetor and the K&S discarder. Mototech also makes a 3-position regulator, but I feel like if you're already getting a regulator to mess with gas, just get one of the other ones that has more positions. You don't need to treat it as a plug and play, constantly turn it. You can put it in one position and just leave it there and have maybe one other position you run it in if it gets really fouled or something. So the difference between the two is the K&S bleeds off gas and the Mototech restricts gas. The Mototech has a helical cut cylinder inside the regulator that occludes the inlet orifice, so you just make the gas path more tortuous. It also bleeds off gas, but it's not variable. It's just a fixed amount. With that, in my particular setup, I could never really get it to fail suppressed, which is kind of a tall ask, but I like to have a known failure point, know what my margin is. I could get it to fail unsuppressed, but it was pretty low, at least with my gas jet, which is lower than what they recommend. And you could, I'm pretty sure, run one of those fine, but I feel like this is the better option just because you can get more control. I can tune the suppressor to fail to cycle the rifle, and then I can take it off and I can get to cycle with the wimpiest 223 I can find as well, and still have margin above and below those values. So you can tune it down to basically almost barely ever eject, and I can tune it way up to run really aggressively unsuppressed, which is personally what I want. It gives me a lot more peace of mind if I got to take this somewhere for a class. I'm not going to need to take a bunch of gas jets or something with me and hope the thing runs. It's most likely just going to run as is, especially if I keep the can on. I have so much margin above and gassing it, it'll run fine. But yeah, it's something that almost everyone should do. Even if you're not running an SBR or suppressed, you're going to get way better parts life if you tune the system down. Everyone should tune their gun if they're going to shoot a meaningful amount of rounds through it anyway. It's more pleasant. The next thing that's worth mentioning is the rail system on this. This is a Rigo Systems. I think it's the SMR9. This is the lowest profile and almost lightest rail in the market. The vertical gap here is the lowest, and the side-to-side is the lowest because there's nothing on the side. It's flush fit hardware. It's slick side. You can get little, it's like grip panel things that bolt in over the slick sides from Rigo. If you want some texture there, I really don't care. I'd rather just go completely slick. You can also get PMM's rail deletes, which essentially do the same thing, but you have more protrusion up here because the bolt is captured, so it can't fall off if it comes loose. I don't care. This bolt doesn't really do anything as far as keep the hand guard from moving around a bit. And there's nothing on here that needs to retain zero, and I've never had them come loose. So it's not really a concern for me, but I do have a little bit of Loctite on them. The Lancer rail is the only one that's lighter, but it's a little bulkier. It doesn't cover your sides, so you can still run some rail deletion panel or slick side combo thing. But I believe this is the best option, and it looks really nice. The Rail Scales anchor is a pretty good foregrip. I like it quite a lot just because of the subtle angle on it, and it's relatively light. It's lighter than a lot of plastic foregrips, but it is expensive, which is kind of a theme of this thing. I don't know how much this thing costs. I really never added it all up, but I'm sure it's quite cost prohibitive. Big thing people are scared of and hates the reciprocating charging handle. This is one I designed and had made. You can't buy it. It's not for sale. I did it as a personal project. I really don't like any of the aftermarket charging handles for the reciprocating scar. The non-reciprocating scars, OEM angled charging handles, probably pretty good. But I like this. A lot of them are really oversized and a lot bigger than they need to be. All you really need to do is give a slight angle on the thing so you can clear your optic mount. The EOTech will bust your knuckles, for example. This is at a 15-degree downward angle. It's barely any longer than the OEM's little cylinder. And then I have it asymmetrical because I only run on this side. So if you're using as a forward assist, which I've not really ever had to do, but if you are, it's not going to hurt your hand as much. As well as the inside is just kind of ribbed, and it's got a spline cut, so it's harder to slip out the further you get over. It's subtle, but it does, like I have these edges fairly sharp, so it does work really well. This particularly the last edge here is, I mean, it's sharp. It hurts your hand if you just catch it, but I don't care. That's kind of what I want, and it looks really cool, which, I mean, everyone cares about looks, so there's that. It's also grade 5 titanium. It sounds really silly, but you actually have to think through engineering this thing pretty well. A lot of the aftermarket options, heat treats, are questionable, and if your gun's really overgassed, I've seen some of them break, particularly on a Scar 17S. The reason for that is the slop in the slot here and its own inertia is what's causing it to fail. So you can't really make the interface any thicker. So how much weight you have out here camming the thing back and forth as it's changing direction makes a good difference, or makes it essentially just destroy itself. If you have really tight tolerances on it and it's lightweight, it'll last longer. Titanium is not as good as most steels in a lot of applications just because it galls, but in this particular one, because it's half the weight and I had the tolerances made tighter, it should last forever. Grade 5 titanium is tougher than most steels on paper, so it should be good, and I had it clear anode and just spray painted it so it shouldn't gall. But it's not broken. So other stuff, I got an enlarged paddle here just because I have small hands. You don't need to do that, but it's cool. You can also get bad levers from PMM. I don't like them, but a lot of people do. Other side, also PMM mag release. This one's extended. Again, I have small hands. If you do, I'd recommend it. Another thing from PMM is the mag well. It's a huge funnel. Makes it a lot easier to reload. You probably will want to file some of the geometry on the inside here down. Obviously, be careful. Don't use a Dremel. Just use like an actual hand file to get the transition more smooth, or you'll essentially catch the lip on the inside of the plastic mag well. Don't be scared to work on your guns. Just be careful, essentially, is what I have to say. I will say mine didn't fit very well. It was pretty laughably out of spec, and I had to do a lot of work to it. PMM was not willing to resolve it, I should say. Unfortunate, that is how it is. I've had good experience with them, but I've had a couple of lemons. And you can tighten it more, but given that it's not helicoiled, it's just bare aluminum, and your thread's pretty small, you get kind of a pucker factor when you get that thing pretty tight. So I had to do a lot of work to make it almost flush to close and screw in. And it's fantastic. I really like it, but your results may vary with the fitment. Super Scar trigger. It's probably the first upgrade anyone should get. It's all right. It's a G-Money trigger. It's very overpriced, but it's pretty good. It's worth buying, though. I mean, it makes the Scar trigger go from pretty awful to pretty good. I have the Radiant Talon style safeties from KDG. I recommend those over the PMM just because mine always came loose. I put a bunch of thread locker on the PMM ones, but regardless, they just always found a way to work loose, and it's quite annoying. So I like the ergos on them better, but I just got tired of it, so I put these on instead. So the Magpul ones never came loose. I had those as well, but I think they're the least positive and ergonomic of the three. You can also make this a 90-degree throw if you're familiar with that and prefer it. So the big other thing to talk about, stocks and stuff for the Scar. So a lot of people make the pitfall of putting an ACR stock on this with an aluminum hinge made by a certain company. That's not necessarily that company's fault. They didn't know, and most people didn't. You can also get like an Oto Arms PDW stock, also an aluminum hinge, and there's a couple others. The issue is that these two receiver screws back here hold the back plate on the end of the receiver in place, and your hinge, whatever piece going on top of that, is what your carrier impacts in recoil. So if you have something like aluminum, and PMM does a video on this where they mention it, imagine dropping a golf ball in plastic versus aluminum. You would assume that it would bounce higher off the aluminum just because of physics. You're having more energy redistributed back into the receiver and components when the backplate is aluminum. FN designed it that way for a reason, to be polymer, and a lot of people that put KDG stocks on it or the other arm stock or so on, and especially if you don't tune your gas system, more so on the 17, these screws will begin to cam and oval out your receiver holes, which is something you don't want because the upper receiver is the serialized part of the gun. So a little more annoying to replace, especially if you SBR'd it. It's just a pain. Solution to that, well, one, tune your rifle, and two, don't run any of those stocks. You can either run the OEM, which I have no issues with aesthetically, and I think it's fairly comfy. I only like this better because it's better with plates. I have thick shoulder straps on my plate carrier, and the OEM stock just kind of sucks for that. So having this K stock's better. But PMM released one of these adapters out of plastic with a 1913 rail in the back. So you can run that and not have any issues. They took quite a while to test it, and shouldn't be a problem. There are some solutions marketed out there for this issue other than just that to run one of the other stocks, but they're really just band-aids on the issue. Mototech and a couple companies sell longer screws, and yeah, you're getting more clamping force on the receiver. You're not really resolving the issue. You're still having more stress on the system, and the concern isn't necessarily the screws just camming, it's tearing out through the receiver. The receiver is aluminum as well, after all, and your tear out stress is essentially the same, and your shear stress on the screws is essentially the same. It's just how it is, it's just physics, and making them longer doesn't make a huge difference. Now, Lingle, and if I'm saying that incorrectly, I apologize, they make a scar lower and some other parts that are pretty cool. They have essentially a little metal piece that sits on the side of the receiver, and it has countersunk sections that go into your screw holes, and you then mount screws for it. It, in theory, gives you more material to tear out through, so that probably makes a good bit of difference. But I would still opt to not put an aluminum hinge stock on it. I'd either stick with OEM or do something like this Parker Mount Machine 1913. And then they make a buffer tube adapter, and I don't know why you would buy it and cast nut it on. I would just buy like the SIG one or the JMAC one, just because it's simpler and you're not going to come unscrewed. It's a little wobbly though. The SIG one may fit tighter, but it doesn't really make a huge difference. So, also, my EOTech's been on here for years, and it's not been beaten to death by this thing. So, Scar's beating to death optics isn't really a thing as long as you get something half decent. So, also forgot to mention the grip on it. This is a VZ Grips. Operator 2 is the texture, and this is short length, slightly shorter. They make a bunch of G10 grips for 1911s and Air 15s, and they also make them specific for the Scar, because this Scar tang is a little different than the Air 15. PMM also makes them, but I wouldn't necessarily say they'll have what you want. They only offer like 3 different grips, so I didn't care for any of those and got this instead. The other things I'll mention that are probably worth mentioning, PMM's swing swivels are also kind of eh. I had one's aluminum thread stretch just because this thing's fairly heavy compared to like an AR-15, and again, sample size of 1, but I didn't trust it, so I just have my sling tied through my front hole here and tied through the back of my stock. Yeah, it's tied to your stock and you disassemble it, but like it's not that big of a deal. So, but I've tried a bunch of different parts over the time. I've had this, and I've not had anything major explode. But I feel like I have a pretty good handle on what you should do to get this thing up and running. Essentially as good and as soft as you can. If you throw a ton of money at this thing, it becomes, in my opinion, the best AR-18 option on the market. I think that you have the most control over the gas system compared to anything else. I think it's a lot better than the MCX, for example, or the Spear LT, whatever you call it. It's way less gassy because there's no T-handle. I think side charging handles are the way to go. In that vein, I will say I may at some point change my mind and like the XCR better. I have a 300 Blackout XCR, and its ergos are really nice. It has the bolt release down next to the trigger guard. It's not in it like a bad lever, so it's much safer. But this thing's really ergonomic, and it's a long stroke piston gun. It's also got an adjustable gas block. You can't really mess with the inlet flow with like a fancy set screw or anything like that. It's just a bunch of different ports in the regulator that you can turn, but it works really well. I like it quite a lot, and it's a really well thought out, easy to take apart rifle. I've just not got the time on it to have a strong opinion on it as far as comparison to the Scar, but it's very cool. If you're in the market for an AR-15 alternative, I would definitely highly recommend the Scar. The parts life really pays for itself in the long term, as well as it's just a lot of fun to shoot, and it puts a smile on anyone's face when they shoot it. And it's a fantastic suppressor host, even if your warranty's long gone when you put one on it. So, yeah, if you have any questions or anything that I didn't cover about it, feel free to ask in the comments. You can also go to one of the Scar forums or Reddit or so on, and there's usually a bunch of people in there that are very helpful and can help recommend stuff. But it's a really cool system. A lot of people overlook, and it's highly tunable, and I feel like you can make it a really, really nice rifle if you spend the time to mess with it. So that's it.